Hello, this is again Dr. Jonathan Bentovish, and I'm recording a very special video today, the title of which is God's Physics, Yud Gimel Tamuz, Geulah is here. So as you have probably seen before, the God's Physics new scientific paradigm, which I was blessed to discover, is considered to be now the new scientific paradigm, physics and scientific paradigm for this century, for 21st century physics and science more generally. We stand at a really historic point right now, which is maybe equivalent to what happened when about 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, Eddington, the famous British astronomer, validated Einstein's general theory of relativity. And at that point, this happened in the solar eclipse of 1919, and there was a specific critical prediction of Einstein's general relativity theory, which was found to be validated, empirically validated by Eddington, and found to be more valid than the corresponding prediction of the theory that preceded Einstein's theory, which was Newton's Newtonian classical mechanics. And we stand at essentially an equivalent point because science and physics more specifically finds itself in what is termed a paradigmatic crisis. So the topic of today's lecture is very significant and very important, and that is, in a sense, how God's physics, new revolution of science and physics more specifically, which I'll get into, how that actually aligns itself and highlights in a new, so to speak, scientific light, what the Hasidus is telling us all along, and especially Yud Bet Yud Gimel Tamuz for all the Hasidim and all Jewish people. Yud Bet Yud Gimel Tamuz is the time in which Rabbi Arayatz, the head of Israel, the president of Israel, that was before Rabbi Milubavitch. So he was released in Yud Bet and then Yud Gimel Tamuz. He was released from the Soviet prison and essentially departed to the U.S. and essentially had the whole Chabad movement, the center of the Chabad movement, located in Crown Heights in New York, and where the Rebbe resided and still resides over the whole of Israel. And so the Yud Bet and Yud Gimel Tamuz is considered Chag Geulah. It's the holiday or the Chag, the Chag of the Geulah, because by the Rebbe Rayatz leaving the prison and the confinement of the Soviet Union back then, and being allowed, he was imprisoned because of his very courageous fight for Judaism and for Hasidus, so that Jewish children can go to Jewish schools and learn and keep the Torah and mitzvot. And he was imprisoned because of that. And then when he was released, in a sense, in a way that was above nature, me'al teva. And by the way, in Gimel Tammuz, his verdict, which was a risk of life, was sweetened and was changed, was overturned from this endangerment of life to exile to Kostroma. That was a far distant village in Russia, and he was there until Yud Gimel, Yud Bet, and Yud Gimel Tammuz, in which he was released. And the Rebbe Rayatz said that when he was released, and when we're celebrating Yud Bet, Yud Gimel Tammuz, he said it's not just a private issue. It's not just him being released and allowed to leave Russia, go to the US, and essentially essentially allow Hasidus to spread all over the world. But he said it's a Chag Geulah, a celebration of Geula for the whole of Israel. Um, and so what the topic of today's lecture and talk is in what way God's physics is actually highlighting this Geula. And before I delve into the topic, they say in Chassidus, כשדברים נזכרים הם נעשים, that when we remember and highlight and relive, for example, the miracle of Yud Bet Yud Gimel Tamuz, in which Rabbi Rayatz, the head of Israel, was released from exile and allowed to travel to the U.S. and start and continue spreading the whole of to the whole world with hundreds and thousands of shlichim that he sent, and that the Rebbe, the current Rebbe Mlubavitch, head of Israel, is still sending so many shlichim to all the corners of the globe. And so so we say in Chassidus that when things are remembered and are paid attention to, when we remember and we put our focus and we live that memory, that special occasion of Yud Bet Yud Gimel Tammuz, in which the head of Israel, and in a sense the whole of Israel, was allowed to get out of exile and to go to a safe haven, but beyond that, to spread the whole of Chassidus to the whole world. That is the beginning of Geulah. And so we say in Chassidus that when we remember these things, when we live them, they actually are happening again. It's not just, as the Rabbi Rayat said, it's not just an instance that happened to him personally so many years ago. It's an occasion, it's an occurrence, it's an energy, it's a manifestation right now of this Geulah taking place in the whole world as part or as connected with this special occasion of Yud Bet Yud Gimel Tammuz. And so we have to understand, I have to explain a little bit about Chassidus and somewhat about the scientific revolution, and we see how these things converge. By the way, it's very interesting. In the Zohar, the holy Zohar Kadosh, the Rashbi, and then we see this in Chassidus, because Chassidus is a continuation and actually is a way of us being able to grasp some of these divine revelations that came through the Rashbi. The whole of the Torah was given to Moshe Rabbeinu in Mount Sinai. Both the Nigle, the part that we see in the Torah, and all of its parts, and also the Sod. So all the four parts of the Torah, Pardes, Pshat, Remez, Drash, Sod, including the Sod, the secret, the inner teachings, the Pnimiut Torah, the Chassidus, the inner wisdom of the Torah, which came then down through the Rashbi. And at the beginning, this so interestingly, in the Zohar Kadosh and also then in Chassidus, it appears in Parashat Noach that it says there that in the Elef HaShishi, Yibak'u Teomot Rabba ve'arubot Hashamayim. So at the time of about 250 or 300 years ago, this was already predicted in the Zohar Kadosh and elaborated in Chassidus, that there will come a time, they were talking about 300 years ago or so, in which there would be an outpouring, complete opening, an abundance of knowledge coming to the world, both in terms of Chochmot Chitzoniot, outer knowledge, that would be science. So there was a complete scientific breakthrough with Newton, and later on obviously with Einstein, and the whole scientific revolution. and then technology, etc., emanating from that. And at the same time, there would be an opening to the Jewish people, and as a result of that, we are light to the whole world. Jewish people are supposed to light the whole world and be that torch of light, leading the whole world to Geulah. And so at that time, both the Chokhmot Chitzoniot, the external knowledge or wisdom of science, and both the inner teachings of the Torah, which is Pnimiut Torah, Zohar Kadosh, and now Chassidut, which also the Baal Shem Tov Kadosh, and then after him, the whole 7 or 9 generations of the heads of Israel, which were the heads of the Chabad movement, leading up to the current head of Israel and the Chabad movement, which is the Rabbi Mirubavitch. So the teachings of the inner teachings, the secret, the Sod teachings, the inner teachings of the Torah that came through Hasidus, first through the Zohar, then the Rashbi wrote before before the Baal Shem Tov, the Rashbi said that inner wisdom, that secretive part of the Torah, which was, let's say, at the time of the Rashbi, the Zohar Kadosh, was known only to a very limited circle of people, and people couldn't study it. It was too high and too abstract. And then came the Rashbi and said that it's a mitzvah l'gelozot chokhmah, that it's a real mitzvah, a real commandment to actually now expose and disseminate and bring out to the whole world this inner knowledge of the Torah, Pnimiut Torah. And then the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh had Aliyat HaNeshama. He was able, with his soul, to go upwards to the higher worlds. And he came to the sphere, to the Hechal of Mashiach. And he asked Mashiach, Ematai Katimar, when are you coming? When is the Geulah coming finally to this world, to the Jewish people and to the whole world? And Mashiach told him, Mashiach told him, when your Chasidus will be exposed and disseminated to the whole world, then Mashiach will come, then Geulah will come. And so what I was saying is that in the Chasidus, in the Zohar Kadosh, in the Chasidus, we're told, it was a prediction that about 300 years ago, there will be a whole opening both of external knowledge, science, and of the inner teachings of the Torah, Pnimiut Torah. And actually, this is what the Rebbe is teaching us, that these two apparently distinct forms of knowledge, science deals with the physical world and with things that are measurable, etc. That's external knowledge. The Torah, and especially the inner teachings of the Torah, deal with divinity and with the Jewish people and with the shlichut of the Jewish people to enlighten the whole world. They seem, worlds apart, but actually, according to the Zohar and the Chasidus, and what the Rebbe is telling us, in the same way, there's a teaching in the Chasidus that says that gold was not created but for Bet HaMikdash. So the real reason that the gold was actually created by Hashem was not so much for ornaments and other things. It was really created only for Bet HaMikdash. And the same way, the Rebbe is telling us that the reason that that external knowledge, the sciences, various sciences, investigation of the physical world, that this kind of knowledge came down to the world in the same way that the gold was not created but for the purpose, the only purpose, the sole purpose of being used for the holy temple, for Bet HaMikdash. Same way the Rebbe is teaching us, and the Hasidus is teaching us, that the science, the whole development and enablement of science to come down and make this scientific revolution, and the whole scientific exploration of the world, the whole purpose of that and the reason that it was allowed to come into being is only that it will point at and converge to this inner knowledge, to the only truth. There's only one truth. That one truth is the Torah Emet that Moshe Rabbeinu kibel b'Har Sinai, that Moses got in Mount Sinai for the Jewish people and for the whole world. And especially the Pnimiut, the inner teachings of this Torah, that we will talk about a little bit, that there is Enot Milvado, there's only one reality, that is Hashem. And the special role of the Jewish people in advancing Geulah through these teachings, the inner teachings of the Torah. And so I'm opening this important talk just by highlighting the fact that, first of all, it's clear that science is supposed to serve and supposed to point at, lead humanity to discover and to, in a sense, bring to our mind the only truth that exists, that is the Torah and the inner teachings of the Torah. And that prediction that says that 300 years ago, the scientific revolution and the outpouring of physical knowledge, scientific knowledge, and in parallel, the opening of what was completely hidden and secretive, the inner teachings of the Torah, they would converge. And in fact, that the science, the physical knowledge of the world would actually converge and lead humanity to recognizing that sole reality, that sole truth of the Torah and the sole reality of Hashem. So that's quite amazing. And in a sense, what I want to speak about today is about explaining how this scientific revolution that's taking place in physics, in 21st century physics, which recognizes now God's physics as the new paradigm, as a new theory for this century, in the same way that science recognized relativity theory 100 years ago plus, discovered by Einstein, as the new theory of 20th century physics. And not only so, that God's physics is actually pointing at Geulah, is pointing at this whole process that Hashem has been leading the world with, the Jewish people leading the whole process towards bringing the world to the point of recognition of the sole reality of Hashem and of the sole purpose of this whole universe, to lead humanity, the Jewish people and humanity, or the Jewish people leading humanity, to this Geulah perfected state. And that's connected with, as we said, Lichiyot im Zman, to live with the time, to live with, to remember, and therefore to relive and actually experience that amazing Geulah occurrence which happened for the Rebbe Rayas, but also for the whole people, the whole of Israel, and for the whole world in Yud Bet Yud Gimel Tamuz. So let me begin with explaining just briefly about science and about how science evolves, and in a sense, we'll see how science now is being metamorphosized to recognize God's physics and God's physics discovery of this singular, higher ordered universal consciousness slash computational principle. In religious terms, we would call it God. And we're at that point, and it converges with Yud Bet Yud Gimel Tamuz, which really is a celebration of Geulah. We are at the beginning, so to speak, of Geulah, of the whole world, and even science and the whole of humanity, recognizing that we have entered, or we are entering, that phase of Geulah. So that's an amazing historical turning point. And by the way, anybody interested in reading some of the scientific articles that were published about God's physics, I've written over 120 scientific articles. They were published in also 4 special issues. Recently, a special issue that was published, I'll get into that in a second, but we're standing at a historic turning point in science, which actually leads the whole of humanity to recognize Geulah, to recognize a shift in humanity and in the state of the world and the universe. So I want to start just by explaining to the general public. Sometimes people think, laymen think, that science has discovered the truth, the ultimate truth, but that's not the case. Science is a human endeavor in which Thomas Kuhn, the famous philosopher of science, has written an influential book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. That was even last century, 1962. And there he explains that that science, first of all, is not science is a process of development. It's not an ultimate truth. It's not a static situation. It's a process of discovery and expansion of our knowledge. And I love to use the metaphor of a person being born in a confined room, and he gets his clothes and his food and all of his needs delivered to him naturally. He doesn't understand who is delivering it, but he just experiences that reality, which all of his needs are being taken care of. He lives in that room and he's happy. The only thing is, after a certain while, where he matures a little bit, and suddenly he hears knocks on the wall, or God forbid, there is a beam of metal piercing the wall. So he's startled because he knows that the world in which he lives, his world, so to speak, is that just this room. He doesn't know anything outside of it. Suddenly he hears these knocks, or he sees this metal bar piercing the wall, and he gets startled. He says, "Well, so there must be something outside my room." And then if he summons the courage and he breaks down the wall or opens a window or whatever, and he sees that really there's something outside of his room. The world that he thought is the whole world is not the whole world. It's just a part and parcel of a house, and the house is part and parcel of a neighborhood, etc. So he starts expanding his understanding, whereas before he would be convinced that the whole world, his world, is just that room. Now he expands that understanding, and he now understands that there is his room, living room. I mean, his room is the room in which he sleeps, which is part of the house that also includes a living room and a kitchen, etc. So his understanding, by the way, and when he does that, that's a metaphor, of course, but when he does that, it doesn't cancel the existence of his room. His room does exist, obviously, but it does change his own understanding, because instead of the whole world being just his room, he understands that his room has a special place within the house and then within the neighborhood. He has a much broader understanding. And so this is what essentially Thomas Kuhn is telling us, that science every so often gets to a point where we have a scientific revolution happening. So let's say when Newtonian classical mechanics was fine for a certain while. 18th century, it held true. 19th century, it held true. But then came Einstein at the end of the 19th century, and Thomas Kuhn is teaching us that before this breakage of the walls and expanding of our understanding from a limited room to a house, from a house to a neighborhood, etc., this occurs after there are, in a sense, alarming signs, alarming symptoms. Like in the same way that a patient has a fever, has temperature, we know he's not well. Same way, Thomas Kuhn is telling us, when science is in distress, when the old paradigm, the old theory, let's say Newtonian mechanics, has reached a point of breakage, a point of a dead end. And how do we see these symptoms, like the fever? We see there are contradictions within that theory or within that paradigm. We see certain phenomena or phenomenon that cannot be explained by the old theory. So just to make it clear, in case of Newtonian mechanics, there were contradictions between Newtonian classical mechanics and Maxwellian electromagnetic theory. They were incompatible. There were certain contradictions between them. And then there was a key phenomenon by the name of the ether. They thought, Newtonian mechanics assumed, that there is an elusive fine element that perfuses, that fills the whole universe, which was called the ether. And that was necessary for many different things, but theoretically. But when they tried to find the ether, they couldn't find it. So the famous experiment Michelson-Morley experiment, they tried to find that elusive ether concept, but they couldn't find it. And there were other experiments, and then eventually, because of these fever-like symptoms, distress symptoms of the old paradigm of Newtonian mechanics, then came Einstein. Then this is what Thomas Kuhn is telling us, that when you have these distress symptoms, it's called a paradigmatic crisis. The old theory has a crisis. It cannot explain how the universe operates. And when you have that, then the next step is the discovery, by the grace of Hashem, there is the discovery of a new theory. That new theory, in a sense, opens the door and says, okay, we can resolve the apparent contradictions and things that we cannot explain if we are just to expand our gaze, open the room into the house, then these apparent contradictions will be resolved. Then we will be able to offer an alternative explanation. Let's say the ether, Einstein canceled the ether. He said the ether doesn't exist. If you cannot find it for long, then let's cancel it. And he had to then offer a new model, relativity theory, special and general relativity theory, which were able to resolve the apparent contradiction between Newtonian mechanics and classical mechanics, and Newtonian mechanics and Maxwellian electromagnetic theory, and were able to explain in a different way some of the phenomena that the ether concept was assumed to explain, but couldn't be found. And the thing is that we stand at just one more point, that in a sense what Thomas Kuhn is telling us, that when we find that new theory, that candidates new paradigm that will be able to resolve the inconsistencies, that will be able to offer an alternative explanation for the key phenomena. Let's say the ether was canceled, but we have to find a different explanation for some of the things that the ether was supposed to explain, like the propagation of electromagnetic waves, etc. So Thomas Kuhn is telling us, when we actually found a new theory, that theory ultimately, for the scientific community to accept that new theory as more valid than the old theory, in this case, to accept, let's say, Einstein's general relativity theory, which was able to resolve the apparent inconsistency between Newtonian and Maxwellian theories, and was able to offer an alternative explanation for the propagation of electromagnetic waves, etc., instead of the ether. So at the bottom line, what makes science, scientific community, embrace the new theory, Einstein's general relativity theory, as more valid, and actually as including Newtonian mechanics as a special case? In order for that to happen, we have to get to a point where we have a prediction, a critical prediction, unique critical prediction of the new theory. In the case of Einstein, this was Einstein's prediction of the double-valued curvature of Mercury's pathway, perihelion pathway around the sun. So Einstein said, because the sun is supposed to curve space-time like a trampoline that has a metal ball or mercury ball at the bottom of it, so it curves the whole trampoline. So Einstein was saying, since massive objects like the sun curve space-time like this trampoline, then he predicted that Mercury, which is the closest planet orbiting the sun, that Mercury would be the one that his pathway would be doubly curved. So he predicted 1.6 arc as the curvature of Mercury's perihelion pathway around the sun, rather than 0.8, which is what Newton predicted. And once Eddington, as I said, the famous British astronomer, once Eddington went and verified the value of Mercury's pathway around the sun, that was in the 1919 solar eclipse. At that moment, the scientific community had to embrace Einstein's new theory. And that's considered a paradigmatic shift. When we shift from the old theory to the new theory, it's called a paradigmatic shift. And we stand now, as I said, at a historic point where it's very much equivalent to what happened 100 years ago. Because right now we have general relativity theory, which Einstein discovered. That's about the galaxies, the big universe, the macroscopic universe. And then we have quantum mechanics, which is about the subatomic realm. Einstein was the father of that theory, and then other people joined him, and it became a completely probabilistic theory with many odd behaviors. And Einstein thought that this is an incomplete theory, but in any event, and that many of the inconsistencies and the odd phenomena there would be highlighted in a new light once a higher theory is found, the unifying field theory that he was seeking for. But in any event, we stand at an equivalent point because we have general relativity theory about the galaxies, quantum mechanics about the subatomic realm, and they are inconsistent with each other. And also there's a phenomena like the ether phenomenon, which was unexplained and unverified. Now there is a major problem in physics, which is the expansion of the universe. The universe is expanding at an accelerated rate, and not only so, the rate of the expansion of the universe. So when you look at the furthest galaxies at the edge of the universe, so to speak, you see it receding from Earth, and you see that rate of expansion of the galaxies growing apart from each other, that rate is becoming is increasing with time. So when we compare, for example, the rate of the universe's expansion, supposedly close to its initial Big Bang assumed nuclear event that is assumed to create the universe. I have some objections and negation of that. But in any event, when you compare the rate of the universe's expansion, let's say with the background radiation, which is an extension of the Big Bang event, you compare the rate of the expansion of the universe close to its initial stage of the universe, and you compare the rate of the universe expansion today, you see it's going up. There's a gap. It's called today Hubble's tension, meaning that there is a tension between how come the rate of the expansion is higher today than it was at the beginning of the universe, supposedly. So that's unresolved. And so at this point, we have all these alarm symptoms, like the fever-like symptoms of the old paradigm. I call the old paradigm, which includes both general relativity theory and quantum mechanics, I call that old paradigm material causal random, MCR. It's assumed that everything is happening by random, just physical interactions, like billiard balls on the table, on the billiard table, and you have them hitting each other, and everything is happening just by random. It's not the reality. God's physics objects and negates that, but that's the old paradigm. And so the idea is that the old paradigm, the MCR, material causal random paradigm of general relativity theory and quantum mechanics, has reached those alarming symptoms. There's inconsistency between general relativity theory and quantum mechanics. There's a major phenomenon about the expansion of the universe and the increase in the accelerated expansion of the universe that cannot be explained by what's considered a purely hypothetical element. It's called dark matter. That's like the ether in a sense. Dark matter has been assumed now for the past 20 years plus to exist and to comprise up to 95% of all the matter in the universe, which is sort of insane or absurd, because for 20 years scientists have been looking for that elusive dark matter and they cannot find it. Very, very akin, similar to Einstein's time ether concept, which also was assumed to exist, but nobody could find it, and then Einstein canceled it. What I did, by the way, is similar to what Einstein has done, and I canceled dark matter and dark energy. I stipulate that they do not exist, and that we have to expand our understanding, like the room to the neighborhood to the city, state, etc. We have to expand our gaze with God's physics, and then things start falling into place, so to speak. So we're now at a historic point, because the same way that Eddington was able to convince the world of Einstein's truth, of Einstein's superior theory. Einstein's theory predicted 1.6 arc for the curvature of Mercury around the sun, and Newton predicted 0.8, and when Eddington was able to verify during the 1919 solar eclipse that Einstein's value was accurate, at that moment the whole of science accepted Einstein's new theory, and in fact Newtonian mechanics became a special room within that bigger house. We stand at a very exciting historic equivalent point. I just now published an article called God's Physics Historic Pivotal Turning Point of 21st century scientific physics. And so we stand at the equivalent point, because the same way that Einstein predicted a unique critical prediction about the double value perihelion of Mercury around the sun, and triumphed. The same way, I found at least two critical predictions, unique critical predictions of God's physics, having to do, apropos, with the increase of this value across time, which is predicted by God's physics, unexplained. That's called the Hubble's tension, but it's actually explained and predicted by God's physics new paradigm, this increase in the universe's expansion rate, which I'll try to highlight, and also the proton radius puzzle, which is something in quantum mechanics, a phenomenon that cannot be explained by quantum mechanics, but was actually predicted accurately by God's physics. So we have now at least two critical predictions of God's physics, which are more valid than the predictions of the old material causal random paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. And that is a real revolution. That's the point in which science has to embrace and is embracing more and more God's physics as the new 21st scientific century paradigm, physics paradigm, and more generally scientific paradigm for science. Now, I want to highlight some of the major points or major understanding breakthroughs of God's physics, and then it would lead us to understanding Geulah and how God's physics is pointing at the beginning of Geulah, and how that, in a sense, highlights or ties with this Hasidic knowledge, which has been with us from the time of Matan Torah Be'ar Sinai, from the time that Jewish people received the Holy Torah in Mount Sinai, and then elaborated more and more through the Zohar and more through Hasidic thought. So I want to highlight what are some of the major discoveries and principles of God's physics new 21st scientific paradigm. God's physics made a huge breakthrough. It discovered the existence of a singular, higher ordered universal consciousness / computational principle, UCP acronym, and that UCP is assumed to produce, dissolve, reproduce, and evolve the whole universe. It actually computes every small pixel, every atom, every smallest point in the universe, much smaller than an atom, all the subatomic particles, and even below that. So the UCP has to remember, sustain, dissolve, and then recreate every pixel, every atom, every smallest point in the universe through an extremely rapid series of universal frames. I gave the metaphor, the cinematic film metaphor, essentially saying that in the same way that if we look at a film and we see a plane zooming through the skies, we think it has a tremendous velocity. But in the film, at least, if we stop the frames, we see that the plane doesn't have any velocity or energy. It's just been presented that the first frame here, then second frame here, and the third frame here. Well, it gives us sort of the illusion. It's not an illusion in the case of the world, but it gives us the perception that the plane has a velocity. And in the same way, I've used the cinematic film metaphor to explain it, to essentially explaining that the four basic physical features of mass, time, space, and energy are really the byproducts of this UCP computing also a series of universal frames. Like in the film frame, you have a frame and then pure light and then a frame. In the that's a metaphor, but the God's physics tells us that the UCP is creating this film, so to speak, three-dimensional film, which creates the universe. In other words, at each billionth of a billionth of a trillionth of a second, it's 50 zeros. So it happens so many times per second that the UCP is creating and remembering, sustaining, creating the whole universe with each pixel. It computes for each pixel time, space, energy, mass. So it creates the whole universe as a frame, it dissolves back to the UCP, then creates the whole universe as a frame, dissolves back into the UCP. But the thing is, each frame is a little bit bigger than the older frame, and there is a claim, specific claim here, that says that it's called the collective human consciousness focus postulate, and that postulate assumes that whenever you have a collective, a large group of human beings focusing on this UCP, such as in the Jewish Rosh Hashanah, in which millions of Jews all over the world, all around the world, are focusing on this UCP, religious terms God. They're praying to God. They're focusing their mind on this, towards that singular higher ordered UCP, in religious terms God. So when that happens, when you have so many millions of people focusing singularly on this UCP, the postulate, the collective human consciousness focus postulate assumes that as a result of that focusing of millions of Jews, in this case, upon this UCP or God, this brings about an increase in the rate of the universe expansion. So if before you would have, let's say, an expansion of a certain rate from one frame to the subsequent frame, the claim is that each subsequent annual Jewish Rosh Hashanah, there will be a new value which is higher than the older value that would carry through the whole year. So in the new year, in this year it's October 3rd and 4th, 2024, the prediction and the call for astronomers, there's now an international contest, scientific contest to validate God's physics as a new 21st century physics and scientific paradigm, in which I call cosmologists, astronomers, and I'm using this podium also to call astronomers, cosmologists to collaborate with me, look at the announcement for this contest, and do the research and measure in specific, very fine measurements, more accurate measurements that have been done so far. But in any event, in the announcement, there is a delineation and a breakdown of what needs to be done. Essentially, I'm calling astronomers, cosmologists to test and see whether the current rate of expansion of the universe before the Jewish Rosh Hashanah would be smaller, and from Jewish Rosh Hashanah onwards, you'd see a higher rate. If that is the case, and by the way, we've received already, as I said, initial validation, it's called the UNCR, universe's non-continuous increase in the universe's accelerated of expansion, acronym UNCR. So those two critical predictions that have been validated, empirically validated, that God's physics predictions are more valid than the predictions of general relativity and quantum mechanics, which I mentioned. One of them was this UNCR, showing that the rate of the universe expansion increases over time. That can be explained by God's physics collective consciousness focus, because each year there's an increase in the rate of the universe expansion. So over a period of time, that means that the rate of universe expansion would increase, as opposed to the inability of the purely hypothetical dark matter element to explain that. Because even if it existed, which I negate, I discard, I don't believe, according to the fact that nobody was able to find it, that dark matter exists. But even if somehow in a miraculous manner it would exist, it couldn't explain still how come the rate of the universe expansion increases over time, as opposed to God's physics new understanding that you have to have this collective human consciousness focus of the Jewish Rosh Hashanah, or such as the Jewish Rosh Hashanah, to explain how come this is increasing over time. And so now we stand at the historic point, because we already have these two validations indicating that God's physics is more valid than the old paradigm, MCR paradigm of general relativity and quantum mechanics. And I started explaining, highlighting what a revolution the God's physics is making in the world. It has discovered the existence of a singular higher ordered UCP, which computes simultaneously all the pixels in the universe at an extremely rapid rate of c squared divided by Planck's constant, which gives us 1.36 in the power of minus 50, 50 zeros, trillions and trillions of times per second, in which the UCP creates simultaneously a whole universe as a universal frame, then it dissolves back to the UCP and then creates a whole universe a little bit larger. And that little bit larger, that increase, that rate of expansion of the universe increases from one year to another because of the collective consciousness focus. I would add, in terms of the revolution, the breakthrough of God's physics new paradigm, I would add that this singular higher order UCP also negates the possibility of the old material causal interactions. Because if we have the UCP creating a whole frame of the universe at each billionth of or trillionth of a second, that whole frame is created simultaneously. There cannot be interactions within elements within that frame because they're all created simultaneously. Between one frame and another, the whole universe dissolves back into the UCP, so there cannot be interactions between the frames. So the bottom line is that the UCP, or the God's physics new paradigm, is acausal computation. It's called an acausal computation paradigm, negating the basic idea that the universe functions by material causal (brackets random) interactions. Those are negated. There's no real material causal interactions and not random, but there is a changing of the frames and an apparent physical laws, physical interactions, which are created by the UCP that's creating a series of frames, and it gives it the impression that the universe functions by cause and effect and material interactions. But it really negates that, really tells us in the same way that a producer of a film arranges the frames so that we can see a certain scenario or a screen develop, but nothing really happens between one frame and another, or within that frame. It's just a frame, another frame, another frame. So instead of the old material causal random assumption, it's an acausal computation. It means it's all led by this UCP, and it gives us the impression that there's certain laws of physics, laws creating the universe, but really it has to point at this singular higher ordered UCP. Then, as a result of all these discoveries, the God's physics also tells us that this singular higher ordered UCP is characterized by certain intrinsic sublime characteristics, such as all goodness, morality. It's leading the universe towards a state of Geulah, Geulah perfected state of the universe, of humanity and the universe. And so part of the postulates of this God's physics new paradigm is that the UCP is leading the universe. That's another postulate. That's the reverse time Geulah goal hypothesis. I gave a metaphor. I said that the same way that King Solomon built the temple, even though he's considered the wisest of men, but he still had to have like blueprint plans and drawings of how to build the temple from scratch to its completed final stage, in which you have the Kodesh HaKodeshim, you have the Azarot, you have different parts of the temple. But we can't imagine or fathom a situation that he would send the workers to try and create a temple, an immaculate, perfected temple, just by having stones, untouched stones, unpolished and untouched stones, to build a temple. Because that doesn't make sense. He had to have this blueprint, which we know he got from his father, King David, and that blueprint shows us how to proceed towards getting that perfected, complete stage or state of the temple. Same way, I suggested that God's physics also stipulates that the whole universe was created from the end to the beginning. like in King Solomon's temple, is designed and is created and is constructed from the end, from the completed phase backwards. Everything is leading to that perfected state. So God's physics is telling us that in the same manner, the UCP has planned and created the whole universe from the perfected Geulah state backwards. So it's planned, for example, domem, tzomeach, chai, medaber, matter, inanimate matter, then animate plants, animals, human beings, and leading up to the Jewish people receiving the Torah and to getting to the Geulah. So everything is leading and is actually emanating from the Geulah, from the end backwards. We, of course, live and experience the world as going from the past to the future, but in terms of the UCP, it's planned, has pre-planned the whole blueprint plan to advance the universe or create the universe from the Geulah, from the perfected state, which I'll speak about, backwards. It's planned inanimate matter, animate plants, animals, human beings, and humanity, and the Jewish people has a very special place, receiving the Torah, etc., and leading humanity towards that Geulah perfected state. So everything has been created in a sense, or planned at least, from the perfected Geulah state of humanity. That's the ultimate goal of the universe, backwards. I'm saying this because now we stand, now we can begin appreciating this major scientific revolution and how it's bringing humanity. Remember, we spoke about Noach's, we spoke about the Parasha of Noach in the Zohar Kadosh and in Chassidus. It was predicted that science, and what the Rebbe was telling us, that science, external knowledge, was given to humanity only in order to lead humanity to recognizing the ultimate truth of the Torah and the inner teachings of the Torah. And that's what's happening now. Really, science, God's physics, new paradigm, has led humanity and is leading humanity to recognizing that there's only one reality. By God's physics being validated with two critical predictions as more valid than the old paradigm, our whole understanding of the universe changes. The universe is not static. The universe, first of all, is created, dissolved, recreated, and evolved so many trillions of times per second by this UCP. So when we look at our body or hand, we say it's not a real, it is real, but it's not a solid reality that exists all the time. It's being created, dissolved, recreated, evolved all the time. The universe at large is in a continuous process of, especially humanity, being led towards that perfected Geulah state. And what characterized that perfected Geulah state? That perfected Geulah state is characterized by humanity recognizing, science and humanity recognizing the singularity of Hashem, or of this UCP, that there's only one reality. There's another principle that they didn't speak about. I'll highlight it. It's called the computational invariance principle. And that computational invariance principle essentially tells us that since this UCP exists in between the frames with no universe, no atoms, no four physical features of space, time, energy, and mass in between the frames, and it also exists during the frames, and not so, even more so, all of the pixels in the universe are really computed and are really a manifestation of this UCP. UCP, so we have this computational invariance principle and also the universal conscious reality, two postulates that are very much tied with with each other, and they essentially tell us that there's only one reality. That's the UCP, that is existent in between the frames without the universe, and is existing and manifesting as the frames, and manifesting as every spatial pixel, every object in the universe during the frames. But there's really one reality, that's the UCP. I chose by personal providence to represent that UCP by the Hebrew letter Yud, which we know in Chassidus, later on I studied, is related to wisdom and to many of the principles of Chassidus. But regardless of that, the God's physics new paradigm teaches us that there's only one reality. It manifests as the world during the frames, and it exists without the world between the frames. And it has one sole purpose, the ultimate perfected Geulah state of humanity and the universe. It wants to lead the whole of humanity, the whole universe from inanimate matter, animate plants, animals, human beings, the Jewish people, and Geulah wants to lead the whole universe towards the Jewish people and the whole of humanity recognizing that singular reality, that there's nothing outside of that reality, enod milvado, and that this reality is moral. It's all goodness. It wants to lead the universe towards that perfected Geulah state. And so we realize that now, with the acceptance of God's physics, new paradigm is more valid than the old paradigm of general relativity theory and quantum mechanics. Science really has entered the point, historic turning point, in which science opens our eyes, so to speak, of the whole of humanity. We all have to mature and expand our mind to understand that the world is not physical, it's not material. It's really the underlying essence, the reality of the universe is this UCP. And this UCP manifests as the physical universe. Obviously, when we say Bereshit bara Hashem et hashamayim v'et haaretz, this is Torah Temet. It's from the Torah, so it has to be truth, ultimate truth, and an unchangeable truth. So if the Shem created the universe, it exists. The table exists, the hand exists, but in Geulah, the Rebbe has talks in which he explains that the difference between Gola and Geulah, between exile and Geulah and redemption, is the Alufo Shulam, is this Aleph. Take the word Gola and you take the word Geulah, the only difference is Aleph. The Aleph is Alufo Shulam, is Hashem, is God. And so the metamorphosis that the world would undergo, which is what God's physics is starting to do, but is really an extension of what we are asked to do. Every Jewish person is asked to study Chassidus on a regular basis, to study Tanya. Rebbe is telling us that it's the end of this galut, exile, and it's a very dark time, as we sometimes see. And the way to dispel that darkness and to bring Geulah, to bring the world into Geulah state, is to study Chassidus, which tells us, teaches our mind and prepares our minds to see that enod milvado, there's no reality outside of Hashem, and how us as Jewish people and the Torah and mitzvot are really creating the world and changing the world so that it will be a host, it will be a proper residing place for Hashem and for us to experience Geulah. And so God's physics being accepted today as the new 21st century physics and scientific paradigm really opens our eyes. This is what the Rebbe is encouraging us. He's telling us Geulah is here. This is the topic of this lecture. That Geulah is here. We have to open our eyes and see that it's here. We have to train our minds through Chassidut, and God's physics may help us to really take it into our mind, put it in a manner that is understandable for our mind, grasp it, live by it. That the Rebbe is telling us Geulah is here. The only thing is we have to bring Alufo Shulam, we have to bring Hashem or God into our perception. So God's physics, and this is through studying Chassidut. God's physics is helping us because it's showing us black on white in a way that our mind can grasp it, our brain can grasp it, that there is no reality outside of the Shem. The Yud, the UCP exists both in between the frames and during the frames, and because it's the only one that's calculating and creating and remembering and evolving every pixel, every atom in the universe, really we understand everything is a Shem, everything is this UCP. It just seems as nature, it seems as matter, but it's really not matter. It's constant creation by Hashem, by this UCP, to lead humanity towards that perfected ultimate Geulah state. And so what we're asked to do now is really open our eyes and see that the Geulah is here. We have to train our minds through learning Chassidus and through God's physics that trains our minds and open our eyes to understand, to seeing, to experiencing, to living the fact that there's no physical reality outside of Hashem. There's no physical reality outside of this UCP. The evolution of the universe has been pre-planned to lead humanity towards that ultimate perfected Geulah state. And so now is the time to wrap up and summarize what we've studied highlight the topic of today's conversation, and that is that the same way that in Yud Bet Yud Gimel Tamuz would seem to be that the world operates by, mere power and mere random occurrences. But a single man, Rabbi Ayatz, was able to overcome the imprisonment by the Soviet Union back then and be released and travel to the US and disseminate this knowledge, this Geulah, bringing knowledge to the whole world. Gives us great encouragement because, as we said in Hasidus, when things are being remembered and celebrated and experienced, that occurrence is now opening new, completely new, exciting vistas for both science and humanity. And we reached that historic pivotal turning point in which science itself unequivocally points at this singular higher ordered UCP or God, that it creates the universe and cares about our moral choices. I won't get into that now, but in God's physics, it's the moral principle tells us that every moral action that we do, I give the example of a CEO running or driving to an annual board meeting, in which he's supposed to get a large prize. But lo and behold, on his way to that meeting, he sees like a car accident, and he sees that there's at least one Jewish person lying on the ground needing help, medical help. Of course, he can call the ambulance and believe that or trust them that they will come to save that person. But he has a moral choice, and given that he can treat that person and can, in a higher likelihood, rush into the Beit Rafat, to the hospital, and save his life, he has a moral choice. He can say, I don't want to lose the prize. I don't care about. I need to take care of my own prize, and I'm overlooking the suffering, God forbid, of another human being, another Jewish person. So he wouldn't do that. I mean, if he chooses to actually do the right moral choice and call in and say, I can't come to the meeting, they may postpone it, they may cancel it. But at that point, because he made that moral choice, in the UCP's perspective, the higher order perspective of the UCP, above, so to speak, there is the whole film of frames, universal frames from the past, present, and the claim is multiple possible futures for each human being, for each Jewish person, for each human being. Because when that Jewish person decides he needs to rescue the life of another human being, the claim is that in the UCP's, what I call a a spatial temporal reservoir, there is a bank of all the frames, like the film, like the DVD, of all the frames of the past, present, and multiple possible futures. The minute that Yid, that Jewish person, chose to do a moral action, the UCP has chosen for that Yid, or that human being has chosen one of multiple possible futures in which his life would be spared. Somebody will try to rescue his life, and there's a good likelihood that would be the person that he saved his life. Quite amazing. That's by the way, an embodiment or manifestation of what the Rambam, Maimonides, the Nesher Gadol, the great eagle of the Jewish people, emphasized that a Yid, a Jewish person, should see himself as being on the tipping balance scale, and each good deed or thought or dibur or spoken language or utterance, each machshava dibur v'maaseh, thought, expression, language, or talking, or ma'aseh, or action, each good deed that a person does tilts himself and the whole universe, the whole world, towards that goodness part, or vice versa. But we want it obviously on the good side. So we start opening our eyes. We understand that the science has discovered and has led humanity towards entering that Geulah perfected state. Science itself tells us that we cannot injure each other because the UCP cares about our decisions, and he will teach us, or it will teach us, if I harm another person, I will have to experience the same kind of God forbid, pain or suffering, not because I'm being punished, but because I'm being taught and opening my eyes that I'm not separate from another human being, from another yid, from another human being. We're all part of that UCP. And so we're getting to that point that God's physics is opening our eyes, leading humanity towards that Geulah state in which science and humanity will recognize that we're inseparable from each other. We're inseparable from Hashem. Hashem is all goodness, is characterized by all goodness and morality and peace and harmony. And the minute that humanity recognizes, science and humanity recognizes, there's only one reality, and that reality is integrative. It's all one. So we're not separate from each other. We can't injure each other. We're supposed to help each other. We're supposed to help every Jew, every Jewish person. Mozaken says that our love and care for another Yid, another Jewish person, should be the same as we love ourselves. Even to a Jewish person we haven't met our whole life and lives at the other side of the world. That's how much we have to care and love each Jewish person, try to help him. And so we're reaching that point of essentially opening our eyes, realizing that Geulah is here, and that living Geulah, that by studying Hasidus and by understanding also the God's physics, it helps us to opening our eyes and realizing there's only one reality. That reality is moral. That reality is leading us and has pre-planned the whole universe to bring humanity and bring the Jewish people at as the messengers, as the leaders of the whole world, the whole of humanity, that Geulah is here, that we have to act in a way, we have to study Hasidus. Rabbi is telling us that at this time we have to study, and the Mozaken, the Alter Rebbe is telling us we have to make a constancy and a habit and a special make time on a regular weekly basis to study Hasidus. And God's physics obviously would help us, could help us. But the idea is that when we stick our mind about this the truth of Hasidus, that there's only Hashem, there's only the Enod Milvado, that we're inseparable from each other, that when we look at the table or any physical thing, we realize by looking at it, by reading God's physics and Hasidus, that this physical object doesn't exist constantly. It's being created, recreated. It's a manifestation of Hashem. And since Hashem is leading the whole universe towards that perfected Geulah state, now is the time for us as Yid, as the Jewish people, to lead humanity, to start living ourselves and understanding and devoting time to learning Hasidus, to opening our eyes, to realizing that the universe is not physical, it's more spiritual. It's been created, recreated, evolved, and led towards the perfected moral state, moral Geulah state, perfected state, in which the Rambam is telling us, nobody will fight each other, and actually the arms and weapons would be turned into plows, turned into something positive that can bring food and health and prosperity to the whole of the universe. So I'm going to finish this talk, this amazing talk, by essentially saying, okay, we understand that we have to live with the time. We have to use the time. Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh tells us that everything that happens to any person, to any Jewish person, is by Hashgacha Pratit, personal providence. Nothing happens by chance. He says that even a small blade of grass at the other side of the world, with nobody to look at it, it doesn't move unless there is an angel above it telling it to move and to grow. In other words, he's telling us metaphorically what Hasidus is teaching us and God's physics is teaching us, that the whole universe is being led and watched over and cared for very much by this UCP, by Hashem. And that we have to change our attitude and understand that everything in the universe is being guided by Hashem, and that Hashem is leading the universe towards a perfected state, and that actually by God's physics being recognized today as a new 21st century physics paradigm, scientific paradigm, the Jewish people and humanity have entered that Geulah perfected state. I want to also pray for the recovery of all the soldiers, the Israeli soldiers, and Israeli wounded human beings, um, and so quick recovery and the release of all the hostages safe to their homes, and a complete victory for Israel that has the right and the duty to defend itself and to live a safe and prosperous life collectively and individually. And so this on this special, very special day, or close to that very special day of Yud Bet Yud Gimel Tamuz, in which Rabbi Rayatz, the head of Israel, was able to triumph and lead the Jewish people into a new era in which we can open our eyes and see that the Geulah is here. Chag Sameach.